Elijah barely slept that night. The painted slashes haunted him, and the silence from the rest of the community gnawed at his nerves. Something felt orchestrated, like everyone had been handed a script and he was the only one not cast in the play. The next morning, he returned to the tree with a tape measure, snapping photos from every angle. He emailed the city planning office to request the supposed new survey. There was no record of one. Nothing recent had been filed. No permits. No zoning changes. The silence wasn't just strange, it was strategic. Around midday, he walked the perimeter of the green space, curious if other trees had been marked. None had. His was the only one. It wasn't just a coincidence. There were other places to build a lot closer to the road, easier to pave, but they wanted that exact spot. Later that afternoon, Elijah visited Carol, the neighbor who had silently warned him. Her house smelled like lemon cleaner and faded photographs. She was hesitant at first, but after some coaxing, she spoke. "They've been talking about it for months," she whispered. "They want that area cleared before the end of summer. Some deal with a contractor friend of Marlene's. I don't think it's for parking, not for us. At least, for who then?" Elijah asked. Carol hesitated. Someone said, ... A real estate firm. Turning it into guest access. Maybe even leasing it out. Elijah blinked. That's not even legal. Carol gave him a sad smile. They think no one will stop them. He walked home slowly. His fingers tingled from the grip of his phone, still clutched in his hand. On his porch, he sat down and stared at the tree. Wind rustled through the branches, but the sound felt more like a warning than comfort. As dusk crept in, a white truck rolled by. It didn't stop, just crawled along. Lights dimmed. A man inside took a photo through the window. Elijah saw the flash. No logos, no plates on the back. The truck vanished around the corner without a sound. That night, Elijah called his cousin, Noah, a freelance investigator who'd helped uncover a zoning scam a few towns over. He explained everything: Carol's warning, the survey that didn't exist, the HOA's strange behavior. Noah asked a single question. "Has anything been filed under eminent domain?" Elijah's heart skipped. "Not that I've seen." "Then what they're doing isn't just shady, it's a setup. Get me the documents they claim they have. I'll dig." Before hanging up, Noah added, "Whatever they're rushing toward, it's not for the neighborhood, and that tree, that's not the target. It's just the first casualty." The next morning, Elijah woke to the distant sound of metal clinking against wood. He jumped from bed, pulled on jeans, and ran outside. There, at the base of the oak, stood a short man in a safety vest with a clipboard. He didn't look up. "Who are you?" Elijah asked. The man scribbled something, folded the paper, and taped it to the tree. Without a word, he turned and walked away. Elijah tore the paper off. Scheduled for removal. Approved by HOA. 48 hours. His chest tightened. He looked up at the sprawling branches overhead. Now caught in the rising morning light. 40 hours. Then it would be gone. And Elijah knew if he didn't act now, they wouldn't just take the tree. They'd take everything around it too. Elijah couldn't look away from the paper in his hand. The notice was printed on standard paper. No city emblem. No official seal, just a line that said approved by HOA and a date scrawled in black ink. He turned it over. Blank. No contact number. No permit number. By mid-morning, the tree stood, in full bloom, casting a wide circle of shade across the grass. It didn't look like something marked for death, it looked like it belonged. But the silence around it felt louder now. He called the number listed in the HOA directory. No answer. He tried the email listed for Marlene, bounced back. When he walked to the HOA office trailer near the clubhouse, he found the door locked. A small sign read, "Closed for administrative review. Reopens next week." No one inside. No staff. Just a locked file cabinet visible through the window and a printer left running, blinking with a paper jam alert. Something was happening behind closed doors, and Elijah was being kept out of it. Later that afternoon, he printed a dozen flyers, titled "Unauthorized Tree Removal," and slipped them into neighbors' mailboxes. He knocked on doors, trying to find someone who had voted, someone who had seen the supposed plans. Most either weren't home or didn't want to get involved. Some spoke in hushed voices and glanced over their shoulders. One neighbor murmured, "I thought it was already decided," before closing the door. By the evening, a strange fatigue settled in his chest. Not physical, mental, like the air itself was trying to wear him down. As if resistance would be punished. He stood on the sidewalk, arms crossed, watching the golden sun vanish behind the tree. A pickup truck rolled past. Again, the same one. Still no plates. That night, Noah called back. "They're hiding something," his cousin said. "I found one of the property lines they submitted. It's edited digitally. You can tell the document was altered. Whoever did it didn't bother to mask the metadata." Elijah leaned against the wall. "So they faked the survey." "More than that," Noah continued. "There's an application for temporary commercial rezoning sitting in the city planning inbox, waiting for final sign-off. The applicant listed is a private entity, not the HOA, a company called Verdant Access LLC. Ever heard of it?" "No. They only registered a week ago, using the HOA clubhouse address." Elijah was quiet. "They're not making a parking lot for residents," Noah said. "They're building for someone else. Your tree just happens to be in the way." The next morning, Elijah returned to the tree. Now there were 2 more men in vests, standing beside it, this time with clipboards and measuring wheels. When he approached, one of them smiled awkwardly but didn't stop working. The other turned away when Elijah started asking questions. He walked around them and took photos. They didn't stop him. Then he noticed something new: tiny plastic flags in the grass behind the tree. Red, blue, yellow. The kind utility companies used to mark underground lines. But none of them were near his tree. They were farther back, spread in a large rectangular formation. Not for a small lot. Not for a small lot. Not for just parking. For something much bigger. Elijah followed the flags with his eyes, realizing they stretched nearly halfway to the creek that bordered the neighborhood. He stood still for a long moment, wind brushing against his arms. It wasn't just his tree at stake. This was a cover. A footprint was being carved into the neighborhood without permission, hidden behind clipped phrases like enhancement and improvement. And while the HOA had gone quiet, the machines hadn't. Only 24 hours remained, and someone was already laying the first stone. Elijah didn't sleep. He sat in his living room chair with the deed and survey documents fanned out across the coffee table. The tree, the fake flags, the private company using the HOA address, everything pointed to something more than just a petty neighborhood dispute. At 5 a.m., he stepped outside into the blue-gray morning. The street was silent, but the tension hadn't gone anywhere. He walked to the tree and ran his fingers across the bark. A sharp edge caught his palm. He leaned closer. A small metal tag had been nailed to the far side of the trunk, hidden from view. It was new. Stamped on it were the words, Project #Axe-13, Site Prep Complete. Elijah took a photo of the tag, then pried it off with a screwdriver. It wasn't site issued. The code didn't match any municipal catalog he'd seen before. It was something internal, private. By 8 a.m., Noah called again, his voice faster than usual. "I traced that company, Verdant Access. It's a front. They're linked to a holding group that's been quietly buying land under unrelated names, all across the county. And get this, the group is involved in contract work for transit hubs and hidden city parking structures. Not residential." Elijah's grip on the phone tightened. "So they're trying to build something big without telling anyone. They need the land cleared and the appearance of consent. That tree is the only thing that makes it look like someone still has a claim. And you're the only person they didn't convince or scare off." "I'm not scared," Elijah said quietly. Noah paused. "Then be careful, because they're rushing this. And no one rushes unless there's a deadline they don't want made public." Elijah hung up and checked the flags again. This time, he brought a small spade. Just beneath the red flag, near the edge of the green space, he uncovered something strange: thick cabling, already buried. Not new electrical work. This was power routing. It had already started. They hadn't just marked for a project. They'd begun it under the radar. He took more photos and sent them to a local environmental group that specialized in fighting unapproved development. Then he printed a single-page letter, outlining what he'd found: altered surveys, hidden company links, buried cables, and hand-delivered it to a dozen houses. A few people listened. Most didn't. Some quietly tore the pages in half and shut their doors. The HOA had done its job well. Fear and fatigue had soaked into the neighborhood like a slow leak. But Elijah wasn't backing down. Just after noon, he got a knock on his door. A man in khakis and a HOA badge stood there, calm but stern, his name tag read Leland. He smiled with no warmth and handed Elijah a paper. "Final notice. Equipment will arrive tomorrow. Please remove any personal items near the tree. Safety precautions, you understand." Elijah didn't take the paper. This isn't legal. Legal doesn't always mean what people think it means, Leland said, still holding out the paper. You don't want to make this harder than it has to be. Elijah stared at him. I already know what's buried out there. The man's smile faded just slightly. Then you should know it's better not to get in the way. That night, Elijah watched from his window as a black SUV idled outside for 20 minutes, headlights off. No one got out. It eventually rolled away without stopping, but the message was clear. The tree wasn't the end goal, it was just where the silence would begin. Elijah woke to the sound of engines. Not one, but several slow, rumbling, heavy. He jumped out of bed and pulled the curtain aside. 3. Utility. Trucks had parked across from his house, their flatbeds carrying equipment too large for a mere tree removal, concrete cutters, foundation markers, soil drills. They weren't here to take down a tree. They were here to start building. He dressed quickly and jogged outside. One of the workers stepped forward with a clipboard, but before Elijah could speak, a familiar voice called out, "Good morning, Mr. Thornton." Marlene Chris was standing across the lawn, arms crossed, flanked by 2 other board members he'd never seen at the HOA meetings before. They wore matching gray jackets, their expressions blank. "This is private property," Elijah said, stepping between the tree and the machines. The board voted. Marlene said simply, "We've exercised eminent control under the amended charter." The vote was certified. The contractor is authorized. "You altered the charter without community notice," Elijah shot back. Marlene shrugged. "Sometimes delays hurt everyone. This project brings long-term value." "To who?" Elijah asked. She didn't answer. The machines didn't move yet, waiting for a signal. Elijah stood his ground, pulling his phone from his pocket. "I've reported the altered surveys. I have photos of the underground cabling. This isn't a tree dispute, it's a land grab." Marlene's smile was thin. "Be careful with that language." From his porch, Carol appeared, slowly walking over in her slippers. She didn't say anything, but she stood beside Elijah, her arms folded. Moments later, another neighbor joined. Then another. Silent, but present. Marlene glanced at them, her smile fading. "We have the legal authority." Elijah stepped closer. "Then show the permit." That broke the tension. Marlene hesitated. One of the gray jacket men leaned in, whispered something. Then she turned sharply and walked back to her car, making a call as she went. The machines didn't move. For the first time, Elijah felt like they'd blinked, but he knew it wouldn't last. That afternoon, Noah arrived in person. He brought documents, hard copies pulled from city records and metadata analyses proving the forged survey timestamps. He spread them on Elijah's kitchen table. "You're not going to stop this by standing in front of a tree," he said, "but you can stop it by blowing up what they're hiding." "Blow up? How?" Elijah asked. Noah slid over a document. It was an environmental assessment report quietly withdrawn 2 months ago. They didn't file this properly. There's a federally protected watershed under part of that green space. That's why they buried the utilities first. If that gets out, not only does the project stop, it opens them up to fines. Elijah stared at the file, heart racing. "So what do? We go louder." They called the environmental group again, this time with full evidence. Elijah sent copies to a local reporter known for digging into development corruption. He also emailed every HOA resident with a scanned packet of the forged documents, a summary of what was planned, and a simple message. They said it was a parking lot, it's a foundation, and it's illegal. By evening, responses trickled in. Most were shocked, some angry. A few dismissed it, but others asked what they could do to help. At midnight, Elijah stood at his window again. The SUV was back, but this time, it didn't stay long. He had changed something. Pushed a crack into whatever wall they were hiding behind. But cracks don't always mean collapse. Sometimes, they mean pressure, and pressure always builds, until something gives way. The next morning, the trucks were gone. No machines, no workers, not even a trace in the grass. It was like they'd never been there. But the air felt different, still, heavy, like something was holding its breath. Elijah stepped outside, his eyes scanning the green space. The plastic utility flags were still in place, and the tree still stood tall. But someone had been here during the night. He could feel it. At the base of the trunk, he found another marker, a different tag, buried beneath a thin layer of soil, pinned with a steel stake. He pulled it out carefully. It wasn't labeled. Just a barcode etched into the metal. No words, no numbers. He sent a picture to Noah. The reply came almost instantly. That's a construction staging tag, usually used for drone-based mapping. This was never about just clearing space, they mapped the entire area. Elijah looked out across the field. If this was a staging site, then what were they preparing for? Before he could think further, his phone rang. It was the reporter, Maya Easton. She had received the files and dug in quickly. Her voice was low but charged. I verified everything. The company behind this has connections to a transportation contractor that was blacklisted 2 years ago for fraudulent bidding. The HOA board isn't just complicit, they're benefiting. One of them owns partial stake in the contractor. Elijah exhaled slowly. You're going to publish? I need one more thing. Photos of the buried cabling and staging tags. I want to catch them while the ground's still undisturbed. He agreed and hung up. Just as he stepped back outside, he saw 2 men in polo shirts standing across the street. Not neighbors. One had a camera, the other, a walkie-talkie. They weren't trying to blend in. He returned inside and shut every curtain in the house. They were watching now openly. Later that afternoon, Carol knocked on his door. She looked shaken. In her hand was a printed flyer, one that hadn't come from Elijah. It had been slid under her door. The heading read, Stop Interference. HOA violators may face penalties. Beneath it, a paragraph warning residents not to obstruct approved development operations. Referencing bylaw codes that didn't exist. They're trying to scare us, she whispered. Elijah nodded. They know they're losing control. That evening, several neighbors gathered at his house. Quiet faces, tense voices. One had already contacted a lawyer. Another revealed she'd heard heavy digging behind the clubhouse, days ago at night. They're not just burying plans, one neighbor said. They're burying evidence. The group agreed. The tree couldn't fall. Not until the truth was out. Noah returned at dusk with a drone, scanning the area from above. His camera caught faint square outlines in the dirt, a grid pattern hidden by the grass, foundation lines, electrical trenching. Some of the work was already done weeks before the HOA even mentioned the lot. They'd prepared everything in secret, and someone had helped them do it from inside the city office. At 10 p.m., Elijah's phone buzzed again. It was a single message from an anonymous number. You should let the tree go. It's just a tree. He stared at the screen for a long time, then looked out at the oak, its limbs silhouetted against the stars. They thought it was just a tree, but it wasn't. It was the last piece still standing between them and something far more permanent. And now, Elijah wasn't just fighting for roots, he was fighting to expose the rot growing beneath them all. Rain fell hard that night, soaking the yard and sending runoff into the gutters. Thunder rolled in distant waves, but Elijah stayed outside. He sat under the eaves with a flashlight in one hand and the staging tag in the other. Somewhere behind the rain and wind, he felt something moving. Not just in the ground. In the neighborhood itself. The line had been drawn. Before dawn, Maya arrived. She was dressed in dark colors and carried a small camera bag. Elijah led her to the utility flags and the dug-up trench. She crouched beside the cable, snapped photos, and gently lifted one of the stakes with gloved hands. This isn't residential grade, she said. This is heavy-duty conduit built for high-load transfer. You don't need this unless you're powering large equipment or lighting for hundreds of vehicles. Or for something they don't want visible on blueprints, Elijah replied. They moved to the side of the tree, where Elijah had reburied the barcode tag. Maya scanned it with her phone. After a moment, she frowned. It's encrypted, industrial level. Definitely not from the city. Elijah nodded. They've built something behind layers of false names and silent boards, but I still haven't found the core. Maya looked at him. Let's change that. By late morning, they walked straight to the HOA clubhouse. It was closed, locked as usual, but Elijah had noticed something days earlier, an old side panel behind the bushes. It was an emergency access door, likely forgotten. He had tested it twice and found it loose. They slipped inside. The air was stale. Fluorescent lights flickered dimly overhead. The main office looked ordinary: filing cabinets, stacked envelopes, a dusty printer, but Noah had told them where to look. Behind the cabinet was a false panel. Elijah removed the cover with a screwdriver and pulled out a small locked box. Maya handed him a flat pry tool. Inside were backup drives, folders stamped with project names like Phase 2 Rezone and Saichi Redesign Address. The one that made them pause was labeled Interchange Access Planning Non-Disclosed. They opened it. Inside was a diagram and interchange for a private highway connector. It would cut through the HOA green space, loop around the creek bed, and connect to an undeclared entrance ramp just outside city limits. They're building a feeder line, Maya said, stunned. This isn't a parking lot, it's a disguised transportation funnel. The tree stands right in the middle of the designed staging area. No permits, no public vote, no environmental clearance, just secret board meetings, false names, and a fast-tracked land use shift pushed through under homeowner silence. And suddenly, it all made sense. They weren't making way for convenience. They were laundering land. Maya took everything: copies, photos, even a short video of the office. Before they left, Elijah paused by the boardroom door and looked at the names posted on the wall. Every one of them had signed the approval. Only 2 still lived in the neighborhood. As they exited into the morning light, Elijah's phone buzzed. A new message. This one wasn't anonymous. You trespassed. This will be dealt with. He showed it to Maya. She simply nodded. Good, that means they're nervous. That afternoon, Maya published a short article online, sharing only enough to raise questions but not enough to reveal what they had found. The headline asked if HOA communities were being used as hidden infrastructure corridors. The article spread. Slowly at first, then faster. That evening, more neighbors came. This time, nearly 20. Some confused, some afraid. But many were angry. Something had shifted. The tree still stood, but now, it cast a longer shadow than ever. Because now, the storm wasn't just Elijah's to face. It belonged to all of them. The sun rose over a neighborhood on edge. What had once been quiet indifference had curdled into something sharper: suspicion, tension, even fear. By now, most residents had seen Maya's article. It didn't name names, but it didn't have to. The outline was unmistakable. And the implication clear. Someone in their HOA had been selling pieces of the neighborhood's future behind their backs. Elijah stood in his front yard, facing the tree. It swayed slightly in the morning breeze. Somehow, it looked stronger than it had in days, as if standing taller now that the truth had begun to surface. He wasn't alone. Carol had returned, this time with folding chairs, water bottles, and her 2 grandsons. They sat beneath the tree like it was a public monument. By noon, more neighbors arrived, forming a silent line around the green space. A protest without signs, a blockade without shouting. At 12:45 p.m., a concrete truck appeared at the far end of the street. It rumbled to a stop just outside the HOA clubhouse. No workers, no announcements, no explanation. Elijah approached the driver calmly. You got a permit for that pour? The man checked his clipboard and shrugged. All I know is, this address, this time, says staging pad near southwest tree line. HOA signed off. Paid in full. How long ago was the order placed? Elijah asked. The man frowned, flipping the sheet. 3 weeks back. Weird thing is, payment was fast-tracked like someone didn't want it to sit on record too long. Elijah turned slowly. The board had known the truth for weeks and kept digging anyway. He called Maya, but she was already ahead of him. I'm at City Hall, she whispered over the phone. You need to hear this. The HOA charter was amended using emergency provisions linked to disaster response laws. They claimed the green space posed imminent environmental hazard due to root damage near sewer lines. Elijah's voice was flat. There's no sewer under the tree. They filed a fake damage report, Elijah. Which means, someone at the utility office signed off without verifying. Who? He asked. I'm still finding out, she said. But this isn't just a board decision anymore. This reeks of outside pressure. Elijah hung up, mind spinning. Whoever was behind this had more reach than he realized and they were counting on the neighborhood staying quiet. But it was too late for that now. Neighbors began moving in lawn chairs and umbrellas. Someone brought snacks. It almost looked festive till 3 black sedans pulled up. From the cars stepped Leland, the board member who had given Elijah the warning days earlier. Along with a sharply dressed woman in sunglasses holding a sleek binder, she walked directly toward Elijah. You're obstructing a legally approved project, she said calmly. No, Elijah replied. We're stopping an illegal one. She opened her binder and produced a cease and desist letter. This is from the property development group that has pre-existing rights to portions of this zone. You mean the rights you never told anyone about? Carol said sharply from behind Elijah. The woman didn't respond. Then Elijah raised his voice, not loud, but steady. Every single homeowner on this street owns a fractional share of this land. You don't get to build here without their vote. That's in the original charter. The woman's lip twitched, just once, and that's when it happened. From the edge of the crowd, a man in a brown cap stepped forward. He carried a cardboard box, old, weathered. He spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. My father was the original architect of this community. He kept every document, including the clause that makes this land a permanent community trust. He opened the box and held up a yellowing copy of the founding declaration. It wasn't digital. It wasn't lost, it was just buried like everything else they didn't want anyone to see. The crowd fell silent as the man unfolded the original community trust document. Its paper edges were cracked and fragile, but the seal at the bottom was unmistakable. Notarized, witnessed, and signed decades ago. This land was designated as untouchable, he said. No board, no developer, no fast-tracked contractor has authority over it without unanimous consent from all titled homeowners. The woman in sunglasses didn't speak. She simply closed her binder and made a discreet hand gesture. A moment later, the 3 sedans started backing out without a word. The concrete truck followed quietly, never pouring a drop. The silence afterward was eerie. Like the neighborhood had just exhaled all at once. But Elijah wasn't ready to celebrate. He approached the man with the documents. Why now? He asked. Why not before? The man looked down. I didn't know what they were doing until your friend's article. My father left this in a storage locker. I only remembered it existed when someone at City Hall slipped and mentioned a trust clause they thought had been retired. Elijah nodded, but his thoughts were already racing. If the developer knew about the clause, then they had already tried to bury it legally or worse. Later that evening, as neighbors gathered around Carol's house for what felt like an unofficial block party, Maya called again. Her voice was sharper this time, cautious. I dug deeper. That development firm, it's tied to a private infrastructure holding company. One of their executives donated to the current city planner's campaign. Elijah's brow furrowed. So the city helped fast-track a false emergency designation just to give them access. Worse, Maya said. They filed an easement request 6 months ago under a different name. The plan was always to run a freight corridor through here. Quietly, your HOA was just the test. Elijah stepped away from the group, staring out at the green field. What looked like one illegal parking lot was actually the edge of something much larger. Their tree wasn't the goal, it was just the first domino. But now it's public, he said. They'll have to back off. For now, she replied. But projects like this don't disappear. They just get new names and quieter doors. He thanked her and hung up. As he turned back toward the group, Carol approached him, holding a small envelope. This was slid under my door just before sunset, she whispered. No return address. Elijah opened it carefully. Inside was a single sheet of paper with 2 sentences. We can wait longer than you. Trees fall eventually. There was no signature. Elijah folded the paper and tucked it into his pocket. His heart was steady, not shaken, because they had finally seen it clearly. The battle wasn't just against people misusing power. It was against systems designed to hide truth behind layers of paperwork, fake urgency, and silent votes. But the neighborhood had changed. What began as Elijah, alone under a tree, had grown into a circle of witnesses, voices, and protectors. And the tree, though marked, tagged, threatened, still stood in the weeks that followed. Maya's story became a headline picked up by multiple outlets. A deeper investigation was opened into the city's development office. The board members responsible resigned quietly, and an emergency election was held. Elijah didn't run for a seat. He didn't want one. Instead, he helped organize something older and more powerful, a neighborhood watch, not for burglars, but for truth. A living archive of what had almost happened, and what would never be allowed again. One morning, weeks later, Elijah walked to the oak tree and sat beneath its shade. For the first time in months, there were no flags, no noise, no strange SUVs watching from down the street. He reached out and touched the bark, running his fingers over a deep groove, left by a contractor's marking blade. It would scar. Sure, but like the people who protected it would heal, and it would remain.